Hi students, today let's learn lesson number 2, the flower. First let's see what is flower. What is a flower? Flower is the main reproductive part of the plant. It is made up of 4 whorls, that is calyx, corolla, androecium and gynoecium. Flower is the main reproductive part of the plant. It is made up of 4 whorls. They are calyx, corolla, androecium and gynoecium. Flower is the most attractive part of the plant and it is colorful too. Flower is the most attractive and colorful part of the plant. It is a reproductive part of the flowering plant. It is a reproductive part of the flowering plant. Now this flower is attached to the main stem by a stalk that is called pedicel. Now we'll see in detail the parts of the flower. This is the diagram of a flower. Here can you see this part? This is called petiole. A flower is attached to the main stem of a plant is by a stalk called petiole. A flower is attached to the main stem of a plant by a stalk is called petiole. Above the petiole, the tip of the petiole where the flower is attached, that part is slightly enlarged or slightly swollen. This part is called thalamus. Above thalamus all 4 whorls are there of the flower. Okay, all 4 whorls of the flower is there above the thalamus. The first part, that is the first whorl of the flower is sepal. Now the sepals, they are green in color. They look like leaf. They are green in color. They look like leaf. They protect the inner wall of the flower. These sepals are green in color. That is why they take part in photosynthesis. These sepals collectively called calyx. They are collectively called calyx. Now the second whorl is petal. The second whorl of the flower is petal. These petals, they are bright in color and they are attractive. They have sweet smell in them and nectar is also there in them. So they are attracted to insects. Insects acts as an agent of pollination. Now these petals collectively called corolla. Petals are collectively called corolla. The third whorl of the flower is this part. Can you see this? This bulged out part like sac. This is called pollen sac. They have pollen grains in them. And then a narrow tube-like part, that is called a filament. This sac, pollen sac, it is called anther. Anther and filament together called stamen. Stamen is the main reproductive part of the plant or main reproductive organ of the flower. This anther has pollen grains in them. So they have a role in pollination. Pollen grains are there. So From here the pollen grains goes to stigma. So this is the male reproductive organ of the flower. These stamens collectively called androecium. Individually these are called stamen, anther and filament. These are the two parts of stamen. And these stamens collectively called androecium. Next is gynoecium. Now can you see this? The swollen part. This is called the stigma. Then comes down a narrow tube-like part. This is called the style. Then comes down a bulged out part. This is called ovary. Inside the ovary, ovules are there. This together called carpel. This is the female reproductive organ of the flower. This carpels collectively called gynoecium. And all the flowers, they don't have all four whorls in them. Either female or male reproductive organ in it. There are in some flowers. They are called monosexual flowers. What are the four whorls? Sepal. Sepals collectively called calyx. Then comes petals, collectively petals called corolla. Then comes stamens, stamens collectively called androecium. Then comes carpel, carpels collectively called gynoecium. These are the four whorls of the flower. Parts of flower is petiole, thalamus, then comes calyx, corolla, then comes androecium, then comes last, that is the fourth whorl, that is gynoecium. These are the parts of the flower. And these flowers, all four whorls are not there in all the flowers. There are some flowers have only one reproductive organ in that. Such kind of flowers are called monosexual flowers. I have told you there are two reproductive organ in the flower. Number one, that is androecium. Number two, that is gynoecium. These are the two reproductive organ in the flower. Androecium is male reproductive organ and gynoecium is the female reproductive organ. In androecium, that is this anther in the stamen, in the anther there are pollen grains in it. These pollen grains will pollen grains are carried by insects to the stigma. I have told you this flower is very attractive. It has a sweet smell and nectar in it. That is why it attracts the insects. When insects comes to suck the nectar from the flower, it comes to the anther, and from there the pollen grains are very sticky. These pollen grains sticks to the insect's legs, and then again when they fly and go to stigma, then these pollen grains are carried to stigma, and once it goes to the stigma, then it sticks there or it drops there. This insect drops the pollen grains there, and these pollen grains, once it deposits there, it travels down to the ovary, and in the ovule there are eggs, these male gametes, and the eggs fuses in the ovule, and then ovary turns to fruit and ovule turns to seed. That is how fertilization takes place. Now we will see types of flowers. Number one, complete flower, and number two, incomplete flower. These are the two types of flowers. Complete flower, when the flower has all four whorls in it, it is called complete flower. What are the four whorls? Four whorls are calyx, corolla, then androecium and gynoecium. These are the four whorls. I already told you what is calyx. Sepals collectively called calyx. Petals collectively called corolla. Then comes stamens. Stamens collectively called androecium. Stamen is the male reproductive part of the flower. Stamens are collectively called androecium. And then comes carpel. Carpels are female reproductive part or reproductive organ. And then they are collectively called gynoecium. These are the four whorls in a flower. If all those four whorls are there present in one flower, such kind of flower is called complete flower. Example, China rose, pea, mustard. Then comes incomplete flower. In any of these four whorls is absent, any one is absent, any of those four whorls, any one is absent in one flower, such kind of flower is called incomplete flower. In some flowers, there will be only male reproductive organ is present. In some flowers, both the organs are present. In which flower, either one of the reproductive organ is present, such kind of flower is called incomplete flower. Okay, any one whorl is absent in any flower, such kind of flower is called incomplete flower. Example, date, palm, papaya. These are the two types of flowers. Now let's see pollination. What is pollination? The process of transfer of pollen grains from the anther to stigma is called pollination. The process of transfer of pollen grains from the anther to stigma is called pollination. Pollination, there are two types, self-pollination and cross-pollination. What is self-pollination? As I told you, insects, they comes to suck the nectar from the flower. Flowers are very attractive. I told you, flowers are very attractive because they are bright in color. It has a sweet smell. It has nectar in it. So insects comes to suck the nectar. Insects are attracted to this flower and it comes to suck the nectar from the flower because nectar is their food. So it comes to the flower to suck the nectar. And when it comes to the anther, anther has pollen grains. This is anther. Anther has pollen grains in it. Okay. Now when insects comes and sit on the anther, this pollen grains are very sticky. It sticks to the legs of insects. Then from there again it fly and goes to the stigma. This is called stigma. From the anther it goes to the stigma. When these insects carry pollen grains from the anther and goes to stigma, it drops there. This pollen grains, it drops in the stigma. That is called self-pollination. Okay. Pollen grains are carried by insects from anther to the stigma of the same flower is called self-pollination. Understood? Pollen grains are carried by insects or any agent. Okay, pollen grains are carried from the anther to the stigma of the same flower is called self-pollination. And second one is cross-pollination. This is stigma and this is anther. Pollen grains are carried from the anther to the stigma of a different flower of the same species is called cross-pollination. Pollen grains are carried from the anther to the stigma of a different flower of the same species is called cross-pollination. Once again, self-pollination. Pollination, there are two types, self-pollination and cross-pollination. In self-pollination, pollen grains are carried from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. Whereas in cross-pollination, pollen grains are carried from anther to the stigma of a different flower of the same species. That is called cross-pollination. If you like my video, please like, share and subscribe. Press the bell icon to stay tuned.